Hi, everybody, and welcome to another exciting comic centered edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. Delighted to be joined on this episode by comics creator. Would you prefer John Snyder, John K. Snyder III? What variation would you like?
John K. Snyder III is fine, thank you.
Okay, absolutely, absolutely. So thank you for joining me and talking with me for a few minutes today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on board. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure to have you. I am enjoying the background. I was going to ask some questions about noir and things of that nature, and certainly getting the noir vibe. But you've worked on so many titles and so many collaborations. So I'll just name a few, and I will not nearly touch them all. But of course, Grendel, Green Hornet. You have Dr. Midnight, classics adaptations like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I mean, Aliens, so many different ones that you've worked on. Any particular favorites or positive experiences that I just left out of that quick rundown?
I enjoy everything that I've worked on, and so they're all kind of my favorites. One recent project that's near and dear to me is the adaptation of Lawrence Block's 8 Million Ways to Die, featuring Detective Matthew Scudder,
Mhm.
which I did some time ago. And that was a big favorite. Yeah, they're all my favorites, really.
Wonderful. And I see the adaptation cover over your shoulder right there. So,
Right. Yeah,
um,
and I just recently did interior illustrations for the Continental Op. Dashiell Hammett's character, a collection of short stories that I did the interior illustrations for from Clover Press, and that was a great experience too.
wonderful, wonderful. So what initially drew you into comics as a way of telling the stories that you wanted to share?
Well, as a kid, I just immediately was drawn into comics. I think some of the earliest photos of me, I mean, I think I was holding comics like along with learning how to walk. I mean, they're I just I just immediately latched onto it. I think that I've just always loved stories and storytelling, and I think that immediately appealed to me as a kid. Um, and all throughout my childhood, I loved reading prose as well, but I was always fascinated by storytelling through images, movies, just uh, just the whole aspect of being able to tell something visually. And even as a kid, I would try to draw comic stories like on notebook paper and try to tell stories. But as I got older, in my late teens and early 20s, I got really interested in film and movies, but I really couldn't figure out how to cross into that genre. So at that time, I had noticed the work of, like, say, Frank Miller on Daredevil,
Mhm.
and he was, to me, kind of bringing a new look to the way comic stories can be told, but it was reminiscent of Will Eisner's Spirit books, which I really enjoyed, the reprints that Warren Magazine had done when I was younger as well. But his work and some of the alternative comic adventure comics that were being done during that period, I felt was like a reinvigoration of different kinds of storytelling that was kind of outside the superhero genre.
Mhm.
And that really appealed to me. So I kind of jumped back in and got reinterested in doing comics at that point. So,
Love that. And I love that connection of film and comics. That's part of my reading history and fascination as well. So curious about, I know you've done science fiction, fantasy oriented material, but also curious about the draw that you have with noir and mystery sort of genres.
well, again, that kind of goes back to my childhood. I think Dick Tracy was like my
Mhm.
first favorite thing. I think before Batman or comics, I was immediately attracted to there was a cartoon show, and then there was which was highly stylized by UPA animation. And I
Mhm.
think that stylization, especially in the opening credits, which was a overhead shot of the city and then it would zoom in, and you'd have all the cars racing around. This very highly stylized, kind of almost modern, modern art kind of look, I think immediately appealed to me even as a kid. But later on, I had a collection of the Chester Gould strips.
Mhm.
And again, that highly stylized black and white angular style that Chester Gould had, along with, Dick Tracy solving the crimes through detection and, hunting down the bad guys and kind of the grotesquerie of how the villains were portrayed.
Mhm.
All that really appealed to me as a kid. Also during that period, there were movies like The Sting and The Godfather that had come out, and that had restarted a kind of a nostalgia wave of those kinds of like gangster noir pictures. So I was, on TV, I would see things like Edward G. Robinson and Little Caesar, James Cagney and Humphrey Bogart in the Roaring Twenties about Prohibition. Uh,
Mhm. Mhm.
all of that really got me, and I think that was an early start into my interest in noir. Later on, when I was in comics, I was working with writer Timothy Truman on a series we did called The Prowler, which was kind of a Leo Cragg, The Prowler, which was kind of almost like what if the Shadow was kind of down and out on his luck,
Mhm.
tired and living in the Chelsea Hotel in New York. And what would that be like? And he takes on a young protege. Anyway, for researching that project, I started looking up. I think the whole film noir genre was just starting to be recognized. This was back in the mid 80s. And I started looking up like a catalog of like list of film noir movies, like movies that were being called film noir, uh,
Mhm.
such as Orson Welles' Touch of Evil, or let's see here, just a number of other pictures in that genre, and it was a lot tougher to find those pre-streaming days. So fortunately, there was a video store where I lived that had a lot of these movies, and I would rent them and kind of rediscover this whole genre. But again, getting back to the relationship between comics and movies, I would freeze frame some of the shots of the movies and just study how the composition was in each of the pictures.
Mhm.
And that was really helpful for me. And I just immediately saw a connection between the visual storytelling and comics, panel to panel, and how they were in these film noir movies. And I think that this is something that comic artists have always been kind of keyed into. I know that Citizen Kane was very popular with comic artists. I know Will Eisner was a big fan of that, and you can see that in their work. So I think there's been a long-term relationship between comic artists and movies, and and the noir genre, even before it was called film noir.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that I try to get across to students if I'm teaching film or comics or a combination of both is the fact that everything in that scene, in that panel, whatever it happens to be, is there for a reason. It's an intentional creative choice. And in a comic, it's an artist taking the time to put that into place. So it's there for a particular reason.
Yeah, and what's really great about comics is that you don't, like movies. You have to really work to get those shots lined up. In comics, you can just draw it. You can, and I remember, I would read a lot of film books when I was younger, and I remember one film book in particular was talking about Stanley Kubrick's Paths of Glory, the World War One movie with anti-war movie with Kirk Douglas.
Mhm.
And there's a scene where Kirk Douglas is being interviewed by his superiors, and he's under this tremendous pressure and scrutiny. And the way that Kubrick set up the shot, and they had a still from this in the book, was a shot from the table legs of the superior's desk. So the table leg is dominating, one side of the screen, and then Kirk Douglas is like this big in the background. So
Mhm.
it's a literal translation of the relationship between him and his superior in that particular situation. And that was very instrumental to me and like saying that, okay, if I set up a shot in a panel, I can go to these extremes with an extreme foreground, extreme background, to set up the relationship that the character's in, or the relationship between different characters. So
Mhm.
all that stuff was very useful to me. And again, I think a lot of other comic artists have keyed into that as well.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to insert a question here that wasn't on the list, so you can pass if you want or go into it. Just curious about, as a creative, what it's like to take the work of like Lawrence Block or Dashiell Hammett and decide what that's going to be like as part of the adapting process.
Well, initially, it could be very intimidating, actually, to work
Mhm.
on something that's so beautifully written and to try to take on that responsibility of translating. I ran into the same thing translating Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson and also Joseph Conrad's The Secret Agent. So you really want to try to get it right. So I think that part of you has to detach and say you can do it. You just have to kind of go forward and give it your best shot. But when I get into these various adaptations, I will, read through the material, the books, and really try to look for a point of focus where I feel like I can interpret what I think, the book is about, and hopefully get it right. Get that interpretation right. When I was doing Joseph Conrad's The Secret Agent, which was, one of the considered to be one of the first spy novels, but it's really about how a spy is not nearly the drama that you would think with like James Bond. It's more of a kind of a really lower echelon, yet very dangerous position in as a career and life.
Mhm.
And it really gets into how it doesn't he doesn't have like he doesn't travel the world. He doesn't have all these fantastic locations that he goes to. He has this really kind of beat life, downbeat life in downtown London. And him and his wife run this old magazine shop just to make ends meet while he's spying to kind of fill in, his financial. So I just focused on. I actually decided to focus on it as domestic drama, rather, and then that way all the political stuff that Conrad had in the original novel just kind of filled itself in. And
Mhm.
I thought that that was a good direction to go with that. With Lawrence Block's 8 Million Ways to Die, um, I found that again, this is in the Matthew Scudder detective series, and it was very clear to me that that the book title is a reference to the old Naked City movie and TV show. There are 8 million stories in the Naked City. This is one of used to be the opening monologue for it. So this story in particular, I thought was it's a mystery, but at the heart of it, it's about this internal struggle the main character, Detective Matthew Scudder, is having with himself, and he's trying to equate his destructive self behavior with the fact that he's in this city that where anybody you can die for any reason at any moment, but he's not but he's kind of blocking out his own behavior is really the most dangerous thing in his own life. And
Mhm.
he's got to come to this realization by the end of the novel. But so I try to kind of focus on that the mystery was not only the actual mystery of the story, but the mystery within himself. And also that it's very clear that New York City is in Bloch's books is like a character. It's part of what the story is about. And it wasn't just the detectives inner struggle, all the characters that he interviews along the way, they're all kind of trying to figure out, their own internal issues. And I felt like that was kind of like a point of focus for me to work on to do that adaptation as well. And I was really very happy that when I was finished with the adaptation, that the writer Lawrence Block was really happy with the adaptation. So that was really great because he wasn't a big fan of graphic novels. So I was a little concerned, but not only was he happy with it, we ended up doing some signings together in New York. So that was a really great. That was really great. That made me feel like I must have gotten something right. So
Yeah.
anyway, it's always a challenge, but I enjoy the challenge. I think it's a great challenge, and it's almost like trying to figure out like a puzzle or a mystery within itself to figure out how to do those adaptations. But I love doing this sort of thing. I really do enjoy it.
Yeah, yeah. And what a compliment to have the author say, yes, this works and it works well.
Yeah, it It really was.
So with that sort of collaboration in mind, I usually like to ask about those positive experiences that you've had collaborating with folks in your career. And I think you've been mentioned maybe by Emily Whitten or a few guests as someone who's also been a positive voice, positive person in other people's careers as well.
Oh, that's nice to hear. Thank you. I've been really fortunate. I've worked with a lot of great writers in comics: Timothy Truman, John Ostrander, and Ken Yale. Matt Wagner. I'm working with a great duo of writers right now, Nancy Holder and Alan Phillipson, on some projects, and there are a whole lot of in between. Steve Siegel. I mean, just so many different writers that I've been very fortunate to work with. And on the literary, working with Lawrence Block was really fantastic. As I mentioned, that was an interesting collaboration because, I really didn't meet Lawrence or talk with Lawrence until after I'd finished the adaptation, of his book, and that's when we actually started communicating. However, I feel like the fact that I'm working on the book and adapting his work, it is a constant collaboration, whether I'm in contact with the writer or not. So, I've had a lot of really great experiences, and I was just thinking about this question that you had before we started to talk, and I was thinking that one interesting collaboration that I had in my career that was a very positive experience was I had a brief period of working with writer Harlan Ellison.
Oh yeah.
And I was I had was working with editor Bob Schreck over at Dark Horse Comics on a Harlan Ellison. There was an adaptations of his short stories called Harlan Ellison's Dream Corridor, and Bob connected me with doing a story for one of the stories in this anthology series, and it was called Standing Room Only, or SRO, and it was a story I think he had written in the early '60s, and it's about this kind of New York hustler, huckster, showman, that these aliens, these giant aliens, happen to land at Times Square, and he manages to figure out how to put them on his act. And it turns really badly at the end, of course. And it had very much of a Twilight Zone. It almost would have been like a great Twilight Zone episode. And the adaptation, the written part, was done by Steve Niles. And when I got the script from Steve had, and this makes sense, had updated it to modern day at that time. And I felt like it just seemed to me like I saw the story, and I had this idea of doing the story in black and white, like an old Twilight Zone episode or old anthology show episode. And when the aliens showed up and started they were performing, that they would appear in color. So it'd be like a kind of combination of the color, the aliens in color, and then the black and white, kind of almost like an old TV show. And I asked if I could go ahead and do that, and my editor Bob Bob Schreck was like, I'll ask Harlan, and so I just figured, that'll be the end of it, right? I'll just go ahead and start in and all that.
Mhm.
So anyway, shortly after I made this request, I got a call early on a Sunday morning, and it was Harlan himself. And to give a little background on this, I was a huge fan of Harlan Ellison's in my early 20s, late teens and early 20s. I thought he was a remarkable writer, and I actually really enjoyed a lot of, getting back to Lawrence Block, I enjoyed a lot of his stories, his short stories about, inner city and crime and noir. And he had written a lot of these stories have been collected in an edition called The Deadly Streets.
Mhm.
And I was very, very fond of that book. I was always also very fond of the collection of short stories of his called The Beast That Shouted Love at the Heart of the World, which had stories like, Along the Scenic Route, which was like an early road warrior, road rage story, and Shattered Like a Glass Goblin. Also, the lead story, it also had a boy and his dog in it. So, the idea of Harlan actually calling me directly, I was really stunned,
Mhm.
and he was just calling to ask, why I wanted to set it in that time period. And I explained it to him, and he was like, fine. And I just couldn't believe, I'd never expected to hear from Harlan. Well, from there, from doing that story, when it was published, he was going to be in town, I think, for a convention or something. I was in Northern Virginia at that time, and there was a small comic shop. A longtime friend of me was running down on King Street in Old Town Alexandria, and I can't quite remember how all this came together, but we ended up doing a signing together. Literally, the shop was so small, we had card tables set out in the front, and there was a big line, and I'd made a little signature plate, and he signed it, I signed, and I was sitting there right next to Harlan. It was just a really neat experience, and through that, we also were working on. I ended up working on a few covers for him, actually a couple of covers of recollected hardcover editions of his short stories, and the series was called Edgeworks. And during all this period, Harlan would call me regularly, and he would act as art director. And working on just the two covers that I worked on was almost like working on a graphic novel. I mean, the level of detail that Harlan would call up and suggestions, and I loved it. I really enjoyed it, and I felt that just those experiences really helped me to grow as an artist and interpretation. And he was always very nice to me and would call randomly, and it was just a neat little relationship that grew out of that. And we had projected to do more of the Edgeworks covers, but with Harlan, things didn't always last that long. So anyway, it was not an issue. But down the road, with IDW publishing, Harlan struck up a working relationship with them to do an adaptation of the book he did with Edward Bryant, which was inspiration for The Star Lost, I believe, or I think the original screenplay for The Star Lost that became the novel. I don't quite remember how this worked, but it was called Phoenix Without Ashes. And I ended up doing covers for that as well. And so that kind of reunited Harlan and I, and we struck up talking again. Anyway, that was a really neat experience, to be able to work with Harlan, and how that kind of extended over into hearing from him and having communication. I have a pile of signed books from him, because he bought both the Edgeworks covers. He bought a Green Lantern page I'd done, and we worked out like a trade, and I have like a shelf of books from Harlan, and the whole thing was just a great experience. So that would be a collaboration that I would say I haven't really, it hasn't really come up in a long time. So I thought I'd bring it up today. It was really enjoyable.
I love that. I love that. And of course, I was familiar with the work, but I did not realize the relationship was that close and that ongoing. So
I think Harlan would get very involved with quite a few people, working on projects and such. So I don't think it was unusual by any stretch. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of people might have very similar stories, but for me, it was very special, and I really, and I have a lot of fond memories of that. So, but again, just getting back to what I said earlier, I've been really, really lucky in my career, because I have worked with a lot of great writers, and, in that, it's really helped me to become a better storyteller. My ability to do the adaptations, I am sure, comes from what I have learned with working with other writers in the past. So
wonderful to meet your heroes.
Yes, yeah, it really is. I agree.
So final question, and we can hit anything that we might have missed or anything that you want to visit a little bit longer. But I always like to ask about sort of next creative steps, what's ahead in the creative journey, or what you're thinking about next. And then I also like to give folks the chance to share about places where people can connect and follow along and see both what's been out as well as what's to come.
Okay, well, I'm at an interesting point with my work right now. I've been doing a number of illustrations and covers and a lot of commissions for quite some time now. And I'm just kind of getting back into doing more sequential work. And I think that I'm just getting back into a period of what I think is going to be an extended period of doing more sequential work. So right now, like I mentioned to you previously, I'm working on a duo of projects with writers, noir projects with Nancy Holder and Alan Phillipson. And maybe I can come back on and talk about those at a later date. Those are in active development right now, and I want to wait till more is done on those to discuss those further. I'm also actively talking with Lawrence Block and his agent about continuing the adaptations of the Matthew Scudder books, and we're really serious about doing more of those. And when time and the right venue allows for that, I very much want to continue that. The series that I started working on, creator-owned series I started working on when I first started in comics, Fashion and Action. I'm also talking with a publisher about doing a new edition of the original collected series with a new story, introducing some new characters, and that leading into another new volume. I'm at a point in my career where I feel like I would like to come full circle and come back to what I started doing initially, which is Fashion and Action. I'm always open to do new adaptations. I have a few ideas for that beyond the Block book. And with my personal work that I mentioned earlier, like the commissions and all that sort of thing, I'm starting to work with a comic dealer, art buyer, collector, comic grader, very well known, Steve Borak. And Steve's going to be representing me for my future original art sales and commissions. And I'm really looking forward to that because working with Steve will allow me, he will start handling that sort of thing while I continue to focus on the sequential work and the adaptations and that sort of thing. So I feel like I'm at a beginning of a new period in my career where I'm branching off into more of what I think it's an extension of what I've already been doing, but I'm kind of getting ready to go to a new level with it. So it's an exciting period, and it's a little bit, it's a little bit, I don't know how to put it, a little unsure about exactly how it's all going to happen, but I make it up as I go along. And, I think I think as long as you just keep working and you keep your mind open to all the different possibilities, and I mean this for everybody, because I think what happens is you get used to a routine in your career and a style of working. But I think as an artist in this field, an artist creator, I think that it's good to keep growing, and it's good to look for different ways, to tell your stories, and keep your eyes open for new ways and new venues to do that. And I'm beginning to see a lot of different avenues and ways to do that myself. And I'm just kind of forging through and following those new directions. So that's a little bit of where I'm heading right now. So I'm heading toward a new direction, I would have to say.
Sounds wonderful. And I would be glad to have you back on anytime to talk about anything that's on arrival as it's taking shape.
That's great. Thank you very much. And if people want to see more of my work, they can go to johnksnyder.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. And I am also on Twitter, or whatever it's called these days. And, those are places where I post work regularly, and I'll be posting more process work and getting into more of that sort of thing. And some of the stuff that I'm talking about that I'm doing right now, there will be more to see about that from there. And I'll be, as far as my artwork and commissions go, all that will start to become available through comiclink.com. And so just keep an eye out there. That would be my suggestion, to look for that sort of material. So
sounds wonderful. And I'll make sure to link all of those things in the podcast description, as well as a pop-up box for the video.
Thanks. Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure, and looking forward to coming back on and talking about more of what I've been discussing today.
It is a plan, and it's been a pleasure here as well. So thank you so much, John.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And thanks to everyone for listening in. Really appreciate it. Thank you.